All right, today we're going to talk about managing personal finances from chapter 28 in your book. The first thing I want to do is go over a couple definitions that I want to make sure you guys are aware of. So personal finance is just all the things in your life that involve money. And personal finance planning is the spending, saving, and investing of your money so that you can enjoy life the way you want, along with some financial security. Your goals are obviously just what you want to accomplish. For this chapter, it's going to be your financial goals. So financially, where do you want to be? What kind of lifestyle do you want to live? What kind of job do you want to have? Those are the goals that we're going to be focusing on for this chapter. The financial process consists of 6 different steps. The first step is to determine your financial situations. This means you need to make a list. This list is going to include your savings, monthly income, and by income I mean anything you get from work, gifts, tips, interest. It should also include your monthly expenses, and any debts that you have. You should also keep careful monthly records of everything that you spend. So if you have a bank account or a card that you use, a lot of times that statement can be helpful in helping you record and maybe categorize your spending so you can look and see how much are you spending on entertainment, how much are you spending on housing, food, clothing, all those things. You can take your bill and use that to kind of break that down so you can have a better idea of what your monthly spending is. The next step is to develop your financial goals. So you need to decide what your attitude towards money is, and by that I mean, do you want to spend it now or would you rather save until later? You need to decide what your wants are and your needs are. Remember, we talked about wants and needs earlier. Needs are your food, clothing, housing. Your wants are the extras. And you also need to decide what kind of a job you want. If you want to get a job right out of high school, do you want to continue your education? Can you work while you are going to school? Those are all decisions that you need to make in developing your financial goals. The third step is to identify the possible courses of action. This is going to be different for every person depending on what their goals are. Step 4 is to evaluate your alternatives. What is your current financial situation? How does that play into your goals? Financially right now, are you stable enough that you can go to school and pay for it? Are you going to need to work through school? Do you have that ability in that time? Is that going to drag the time that you go to school out? Are you going to have to go for 5 years instead of 4 so that you have time to work and still manage your school schedule? What are your personal values that could affect your financial decisions? And what are the consequences and risks of each decision that you make? Each decision that you make is going to have a risk that comes with it, and both good and bad consequences that come with it. Those are all going to be based on personal choices, how you evaluate those alternatives. Step 5 is to implement a financial plan of action. So you're going to list the ways you can achieve your financial goals and pick one. Step 6 is to review and revise your plans. So your plans are going to change as you get older and your goals are going to change. That means that you need to reevaluate and revise your plan at least once a year. When you're making these financial decisions, you're probably going to want some additional information. So some good sources of financial information are the internet. So look on the internet for social and economic conditions as well as any company information. Lots of companies post their information online. So if you're looking to invest in a company, you can go online to their website and see how they're doing financially and how they treat their investors. You could also look for economic conditions. So you can go and see how the economy is doing. Check on, are businesses flourishing? Are they closing? What's the Dow Jones doing? What are the grain markets doing? Those are all things you can look at to determine some of the economic conditions. So first thing you can do is go to the internet for financial information. Also, if you're looking into a specific company, you can go and ask them to mail you information. So the mail can be a good source of information. The third source of information is magazines. So publications like Business Week, The Times, and the U.S. News and World Report. Those are all good magazines you can go to for financial information to help you make better decisions. And finally, you guys shouldn't forget about the newspapers. So the New York Times and the Financial Times are good newspapers to go to for financial information. So the four sources, good sources of financial information, are the internet, direct mail from a company that you're interested in, magazines, and newspapers. When you're making financial decisions, you're going to want to understand the risks that you're taking. Every choice has consequences and risks associated with it. Some of the risks that you might want to consider are inflation risks. So inflation is just the general rise or decrease of money, of the value of money. So if you want to buy an item, you're taking a risk that inflation could go up and the item could cost you more later on down the road because you've weighed it. However, the same is true, it could go down. You never know. So inflation is something you might want to consider. Interest rates, interest rate risks. So interest rates also rise and fall according to the economy, and that can affect the cost of the money that you borrow. So say you're going to buy a house, interest rates are going to be something that are really going to concern you, what they are and where they're at. I know at one point in time, the government was offering first-time homeowner incentives, and so that was something that my parents suggested I take into consideration because I was close to the age of buying a house. They said, you know, you might want to consider buying one a little bit earlier just so you can take advantage of this incentive. So the government was just giving money to first-time home buyers, trying to get people and encourage people to buy homes and add that money to the economy. Income. So you're taking a risk when you wait that your income can rise or fall. Maybe you lose your job unexpectedly when you go into work one day, and that income that you were depending on to make your house payment isn't there anymore. So income is always a risk factor. You want to consider how secure your job is. Personal risks. So personal risks are going to vary depending on who you are. Something such as choosing to drive to a different state when there are poor road conditions, maybe the roads are icy or something, instead of buying a plane ticket, even though it's a little more expensive, but it's safer because you're not on the icy roads. So that's a personal risk. You have to decide, do you want to save the money and drive, or do you want to spend a little bit more money and fly in a plane so you can avoid the icy roads? Liquidity risks. So liquidity is just the ability to sell an item in order to get money for it. So liquidity risks just mean that you're not going to be able to sell that item, or there are not enough buyers for that item to sell it at a price that makes you money. You might have to sell it at a loss where you lose money. Those are liquidity risks. You have to choose which risks are right for you, depending on your financial situation. It's important to consider insurance. Sometimes you got to remember, insurance costs you money, but it can help decrease your risks in some cases. So that's something that you might need to take into consideration. All right, so the consequences of choices. When I read this section, I immediately thought of having your cake and eating it too, but I couldn't find a good cake picture. I just found pancake pictures. So we're going to think of having our pancakes, but you can't eat them too, obviously. So consequences of choices. When you make a choice, there is always an opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is just what you give up when you make one choice instead of another. So it's like a trade-off. So for example, if you decide I want to go to college full-time and I can't work while I'm going to college full-time and get the scores in my classes that I want to get, the opportunity cost is that you are missing out on that job that you could get. So you're missing out on that pay and that money and the work experience in order to get a degree so that when you graduate, you can get a better job. So that job that you're missing out on is your opportunity cost. Excuse me. If you decide that you want to go into high school, or sorry, come out of high school and go straight into a job, your opportunity cost then is that college, that education, and the job that you could have had. All right, so like I said, you can't have your cake and eat it too. So every time you make a decision, there's going to be an opportunity cost or a trade-off that you're going to have to decide which is more important to me. You have to evaluate what you want to give up and decide if what you're giving up is worth what you can gain. So make sure when you make choices that you really take time to consider the trade-offs and the opportunities that you're going to be missing out on in order to gain the other opportunities or the financial situation that you're going to obtain through making those choices. The importance of budgeting. So money management is the method of planning to get the most from one's money. You need to remember that income is a limited source. It all depends on your job and how you can get money, where you can get money. So your budget needs to be your plan for using your income in a way that best meets your needs and your wants, if you can accommodate any wants. The first thing that needs to happen, though, is you need to make sure that your budget covers your needs. The 3 things that need to be included in your budget are your expected income. So what kind of money you expect to bring in on a monthly or bi-weekly basis. Your planned expenses. So items like rent, utility, those are all things you can plan out. Those should be around the same amount every month. And planned savings. So you need to decide how much you're going to put into a retirement account or how much you're going to put into a savings account. So those 3 things need to be in your budget: your expected income, your planned expenses, and your planned savings. When you prepare your budget, there are 6 main steps that you need to consider. First, you need to set your financial goals. Then you need to estimate your income. Budget for unexpected expenses and savings. Budget for fixed expenses. Budget for variable expenses. And then record what you spend. All right, so preparing your budget, the first thing you need to do is set your financial goals. So you need to decide, what do I want to accomplish in the next month, the next year, the next 5 years? So you need to decide what you need to accomplish over a couple different periods of time. Then you need to decide what is important to me. So is it important that you buy a house, or are you okay with renting? Is it important that you have a really nice car? Can you sacrifice maybe some of your other wants to get that car? You need to decide what's important to you. Then you need to decide if your goals are practical. Is it practical for me to want a Ferrari when I don't want to go to college and go through graduate school and continue to get my education and work as a CEO? Probably not. You need to just find goals that are practical, that fit into your financial plan. And if you decide that your goals and your financial plan aren't in alignment, you need to change one or the other, either your goals or you need to figure out a different financial plan. Then you need to separate your goals into short-term, intermediate, and long-term. So first you need to decide what you want to accomplish in a specified time period, specifically in the next month, year, and 5 years. Then you need to decide what's important to me. Then what are my goals? And then you need to separate your goals into short-term, intermediate, and long-term goals. Next, you need to estimate your income. So income is the actual amount of money that you earn or receive during a given period. Gross pay is the total amount of money you earned for a specific time. So your gross pay is your total pay. Deductions are amounts taken out of your pay before you receive your check. So there are a couple different deductions that you might have. First off, everybody's going to have tax deductions, so those are going to come out of your check. Insurance premiums, if you buy insurance through your work, those insurance premiums are going to come out of your check. Retirement contributions, if you have a retirement account through your work, they will take those out of your check. And then if you are a part of a union dues will come out of your paycheck. So once all those deductions come out of your gross pay, what you're left with is your net pay. So that's the amount you actually get to take home. It's the gross pay minus any deductions. Next, you need to budget for any unexpected expenses and savings. So an expense is the amount of money used to buy or do something, and unexpected expenses would include medical needs that might happen if somebody breaks their leg or gets sick, needs to go to the doctor, the hospital, rising costs, so inflation that we talked about earlier, maybe your car breaks down. Those are all unexpected costs. They're things that you didn't plan on happening, but they did happen. Just because you didn't plan on them happening doesn't mean that you don't pay for them. You have to pay for those things as they occur. So part of your budget needs to allocate for those funds, those unexpected expenses. You also need to have a savings account. So savings help provide for future wants and needs, and they help provide relief for those unexpected expenses that we talked about. So my husband and I have a designated amount that we consistently keep in our savings account. And then when we have an issue and we feel like we don't want to put it on a credit card, or we don't want to it needs to be paid for immediately, we can say, well, we've got our savings account. Do we want to go ahead and use some of that money from that savings account to pay for this, even though this wasn't something we planned on happening? And then slowly after we pay that off, if we choose to take the money out of our savings account, we build that back up to the same set amount that we've both agreed on. So our savings account helps us provide a buffer. It saves us if one of us were to get sick, or like I said, have our car break down. We can use that money and not blow our budget, not have to go without things, because we've slowly saved over time and provided ourselves that safety net. Remember that your expenses and income have to be less than or equal to your total income. All right? You cannot spend more than you make. That's when you get into trouble with debt and the credit cards that we've talked about. Also, you need to budget for fixed expenses. So fixed expenses occur regularly and are regularly paid. So if you rent an apartment, that's a fixed expense that occurs regularly. However, you need to know that that it's only fixed for the time of your contract. So when your contract's up, that amount might change. Even though it says it's a fixed expense, it's because it's regularly paid over time, and it'll be the same amount for an extended period of time. So fixed expenses are usually rent. Your utilities are going to vary a little depending on the season, but for the most part, they should stay in the same area. That can be something that you budget for as a fixed expense. Car payments, student loan payments, those are all fixed expenses that you can budget for. All right, you also have to budget for variable expenses. So variable expenses are the changes that can be controlled more easily than any other expenses. So variable expenses are your food, your phone, your entertainment, gifts. Those are all items that you can control. You have a little bit more control over those than, say, your utilities or your rent bill. I can say, the budget's tight this Christmas. Instead of spending $50 on every person, we're just going to spend $40. Or maybe I decide that my phone bill is getting a little high, so for the next contract, I'm going to decrease my data. Or maybe for food or entertainment, you can say, I had some unexpected expenses. I'm going to make that up by not going out to eat and eating at home, or not going out to the movies, or whatever you do with your friends. So those are things that you have more control over. You can make choices to decrease those expenses and then use the money that you might have spent on that to compensate for maybe some other expenses that you weren't counting on. You also need to record what you spend. You should keep a monthly record of your budget, and that'll help you get an idea of what your budget needs to be. So we talked about with credit cards, how you can look at that statement, or if you have a bank, you can look at that banking statement and it can help you categorize and get a better idea of where you spend the bulk of your money, and if the money you're spending is appropriate for that particular area. Budget variance is just the difference between the budgeted amount and the actual amount that you spend. So if you have a surplus, that means that you have extra money that you can either save or spend, depending on what your goals are. Maybe your goal is to buy a car, so you might want to save it. Or maybe you feel like you're in a good place where you are, and so you want to spend it and buy yourself something nice. So if you have a surplus, you can make decisions on whether you want to save or spend that extra money. And a deficit is when more money is spent than is earned, and that's when you're in trouble, because I said already that your income has to be greater than or equal to your expenses. So if you have a deficit, you're not doing that. You're going to be in debt, and when we're in debt, we pay interest. That's what we learned in our credit card chapter. So it's gonna, not only are you losing money because you owe money to people, you're adding additional money to that amount that you owe because there's more than likely interest on that. All right, and that's the end of the notes for this chapter today.